Tonight, I'm going to talk about how to utilize Tantric Yoga in order to stop overthinking. Let's just jump right into it. So, overthinking is something that most people in modernity are plagued by. Why is that? Because this age is an intellectual age. Modernity is defined by a very intense attachment to the mind, to the intellect, to what we would associate with the Vishuddhi in the chakra system. And different historians will argue on the date at which we can assign to the beginning of modernity. But from my perspective, I would say that modernity begins with the rise of the Abrahamic tradition, which is a tradition of the word, begins with the word, ends with the word. It is intensely intellectual and legalistic, elements that we would associate with the Vishuddhi. And the changeover into this age of the Vishuddhi influenced the development of modern philosophy, which gave birth to science, what we call science, modern science, and mathematics, and all of these practices that are very intellectual. And in the beginning of this age, the mind was utilized within an Aryan context very effectively. So, for example, we have the Athenians. The Athenians contributed quite a bit to the advancement of the human condition because they integrated the mind into a polytheistic framework from which they were able to develop new ways of perceiving the material world, new ways of utilizing the mind to create conditions that were conducive to the good life, to the advancement of civilization. And civilization has gotten a bad rap over time because within modernity, though we began with a very healthy integration of the mind became tyrannical, and humanity was stripped from a healthy relationship with the physical world. So, education in the Greco-Roman world was centered around cultivation of the physical body. You would have educational spaces that were outdoors, gymnasiums. And so you'd spend a lot of time cultivating your body and integrating with the creative fire, the inner fire. I discussed this in my lecture on the difference between Abrahamic and Aryan education. But the Abrahamic influence took over. Okay, modernity is not defined by the strain of intellect that we find in, for example, the Tibetan Buddhist tradition or the Greco-Roman tradition. It is defined by the Abrahamic strain of the mind. And I'm not going to go into much detail in regards to how that developed because I addressed that in a previous lecture. But essentially, what occurred was a move towards focusing on the mind as the center of consciousness and stripping away the holistic expression of consciousness outside of the mind. What does that look like? Well, within Tantra, we recognize that consciousness, the center of consciousness, can shift from one chakra to the next. So if somebody's operating from the gut, okay, the Manipura, we would say that person is expressive, shoots from the hip, acts first, and then thinks later. It's simplified, but that's basically the way we would define someone who operates from the gut. Okay? And there are civilizations that operate from the gut. Now, the opposite side of that would be a civilization or an individual who operates from a center of the mind. And the mind is a place of great diligence, it's a place of great introspection. So, society at that point looks in on itself and begins to assess itself. And as I said, you can have some very beautiful things develop from that. We've had the advancement of civilization, technology has come about through that looking inward. But civilization has become something that is very alien to other aspects of the human condition. When your center of consciousness is based in the mind, everything becomes a cult of the mind, and you begin to lose access from other elements. And this can happen from any center of consciousness. If, for example, you have a civilization where the consciousness is centered in the gut and the creative fire is emphasized, you can lose connection to the mind. You can lose connection to introspection. And as a result of that, the civilization can become too active and it can burn itself out very quickly. So, this is typically something that occurs in the later stages of civilizational development. Usually, when a civilization begins to develop itself, when it gains momentum, there is a healthy expression of the organizational aspects and cultural potential of that civilization. It is only when the imbalance towards one specific aspect of consciousness becomes such that all other elements of consciousness are disempowered, sometimes outright abandoned, that is when the decadence tends to set in. So, we have experienced the decadent end stages of modern civilization. We are now at the end of that. And we are seeing a transfer into the age of Ajna. That's something that I've also discussed in a previous lecture. As part of that process of decadence, the imbalance towards the mind is such that those individuals who are raised in those conditions are prone to overthinking. They are prone to far too much introspection, and they are prone to a lack of healthy activity in the physical body and in the emotional center, and also in the spirit. Because the mind, like any center of consciousness, the mind can be a barrier to everything else in the body. And this is true of every center of consciousness. Everything that we associate with the chakras in Tantra can become a barrier to holistic expression. So, what are the symptoms of someone who has been plagued by the decadence of the age of the mind? We have to understand these symptoms so that we can identify the problem and then begin to apply the solution through Tantric Yoga. The problems that are associated with overstimulation of the mind. First, we have the increase in anxiety. Anxiety is something that has become an epidemic, especially in the West. When you examine the interplay between the Vishuddhi, which is the seat of the mind, and the Manipura, which is the seat of creativity and emotional expression, you can see these 2 points as being the flight or fight point in that spectrum. So if you are faced with a challenge and it puts you into a fight or flight reaction, flight we associate with the element of air, This is the Vishuddhi. Fight we associate with the element of fire. This is the Manipura. If you err on the side of flight, you're stimulating your mind. And if you err on the side of fight, you're stimulating your gut. If the mind is generally stimulated by the cultural experience, as it is in modernity, then when you are faced with stress, the tendency is towards flight. And much of the anxiety that people experience in modernity leads them to embrace retreat. Now, there is no inherent superiority of the flight response versus the fight response. Sometimes it's better to fly away than to stay and fight. But most people within modernity have found it very difficult to bring themselves to a condition where they are willing to fight. And if they are able to bring themselves into that condition, it almost always manifests in a very unrefined manner. And by that I mean that individuals who are not used to interacting with the fight response in their consciousness can treat it in a very juvenile way. Think of an infant who is just learning how to walk. If that child has not been encouraged to learn how to walk, or if they've never walked before in their life, they're going to stumble. It's going to be very awkward. So, expression within modernity, for most people, is a very awkward thing. This is why it is so rare to find someone who can express themselves in a manner that is tasteful, that is pleasurable. Most expression is deeply awkward. The rise in autism within modernity is likely due to the fact that we live in such a mind-heavy culture. And so those individuals who would have a tendency towards deep introspection, that tendency is increased, it is promoted to the point where many of these intellectual individuals are crippled by the sheer amount of introspection that they are exposed to, or that is stimulated within them. So this contributes to the development of a very specific form of anxiety. This contributes to neurosis. Neurosis is a serious condition. Neurosis is not a term that is recognized in contemporary psychology, but I would argue that it is a very effective term for describing the type of anxiety that is prevalent in our contemporary Western world, and in the East as well, because everything Abrahamic is extremely neurotic. There is anxiety piled on top of anxiety. There is worry over worry. People are so worried about the awkward way in which they express themselves that they are crippled by that, and they can no longer interact with the external world. And this contributes to alienation. And this encourages a deeper retreat into the self, into the mind. Now, the problem here is that it's not with the mind itself. The mind itself is a beautiful thing. The problem is with misuse of the mind. So, most people who are forced into this deep state of introspection don't know how to navigate that airy plane. They don't understand how to interact with this degree of overthinking. And so it's very difficult for them to escape that condition. Consider, for example, the fact that the printing press has made the written word available to so many people, more people than at any other time in recorded history. Now, there was a time when the Shudra caste, or the common people, were not exposed to ideas with such intensity. But now it is commonplace for the average man to be reading And in fact, they are put into an institution of public education where they are taught to and encouraged to read. Read. And then on top of that, they are exposed to a constant stream of information through the internet, through television, through radio. So it's an information overload. And there are certain people who are naturally equipped for this level of information, but those are rare individuals. Society has been structured around those individuals. And so the fact of the matter is, most people, most of the common people, probably should not be reading. They probably should never have been exposed to the written word. And if they were exposed to it, it should have been at a very basic level of being able to read road signs and things of that nature. But when you live in an advanced civilization where you expect every Shudra to be fully aware of the IRS tax code, the manner in which they fill out forms to receive a driver's license, the contractual obligation associated with their mortgage, all of this shit, which, by the way, not even the experts understand. If someone tells you they understand the IRS tax code, they're full of shit. Okay? They don't understand it. It is a deeply occulted, arcane text that is virtually impossible to navigate. And it is based upon principles of Abrahamic legalism that have gone completely off the rails. So, in a civilization where the mind is not so occulted, excuse me, the law is simple. The law is developed in such a way that common people who don't read, common people who can't read, can still understand it and follow it. But if you fail to consider the fact that there are people who are not born with the capacity to conceptualize and digest that amount of information, you will begin to develop social orders that are detached from the physical body and the expression of physicality within the social body, which is the Shudra, which we would associate with the Muladhara. So what is occurring on a social level is also occurring on an individual level. And it happens to almost everyone. Even individuals who are rooted in the Vishuddhi, who have a natural propensity for scholarly activities, they become overloaded by the stimulation of the mind, and it makes it very difficult to function socially. So what do we do with this? How do we solve this problem? How do we eliminate the neurosis? How do we eliminate the anxiety? How do we eliminate the petty legalism that develops from overstimulation of the mind? It begins by recognizing that we are fundamentally physical beings in the present age. This is the age of the Kali Yuga. So the foundation of our consciousness is the Muladhara, which is the physical body. Now, I'm going to say something here that can be a bit confusing, but I'm going to clarify this. If you are reading in order to solve your problems with anxiety or neurosis, if you're consuming a bunch of information in order to solve these problems with overthinking, I'm going to tell you right now, you have found all the information you need. I'm going to give you exactly what you need right now. Stop reading. Stop absorbing information right now. Stop. Do some push-ups. Go for a run. Practice asana. Stimulate your physical body. Get your physical body in order before you pick up another book or you listen to any more words, okay? And if you are going to pick up a book, it should be one that deals with physical exercise, and you need to put it into practice. That is the first step for getting yourself out of your mind, okay? What you don't want to do, and this, as I said, I'm going to clarify this in a moment because there are some exceptions to this. Generally speaking, what you don't want to do, you don't want to go to a therapist right now. You don't want to go into an environment that is going to increasingly stimulate your mind and pull you away from what really will heal you, which is to get back in touch with your physical body. Now, as I said, there is a exception to this rule. Certain people can only escape the mind through the mind. Okay, so for the vast majority of people, regular physical exercise, and I'm talking about the Shudra, I'm talking about common people, regular physical exercise is really all you need, unless you have some serious disorder that requires medication or serious therapy. Regular physical exercise and a healthy diet is all you need to start the process of healing your mind. Now, this is where it gets complicated. There are certain people who cannot escape the mind except through the mind. Okay? A lot of the people who are going to hear this lecture probably fit into that category. People who have a natural tendency towards the intellect will find it difficult to escape the confines of the mental matrix that they have been placed within. Why is that? It's because intellectual people, naturally intellectual people, need to have an intellectual foundation for change. Otherwise, they cannot properly embrace that change. So it's like this. In Tantra, we have certain iconography that represents a principle of practice that is more or less relevant to any given yogin. And one example of this is the iconography of Shinamasta. Shinamasta is a Mahavidya that we associate with the Raja state. So that is everything that encompasses the Manipura and the Anahata. This is the seat of fire and expression. All right, for those listening to the replay of this lecture, I had to restart the stream on YouTube as I was just about to mention the cult of Shinamasta. So I'm going to give this a couple minutes for everyone to log on here. But before I begin the next half of this conversation, I'm just going to give a little bit of a recap. So I'm talking about how within modernity there is a shift towards a deep focus upon the mind, which in the beginning of the age was very potent and effective in advancing civilization, in advancing technology, but now has become a decadent form, which has led to increasing anxiety and a collapse of the ability of many people to have a healthy relationship with expression and the physical world. So now we will continue with our discussion on YouTube. So within tantric iconography, we have the symbol of Shinamasta. And we can utilize these symbols in order to understand how to put into practice something like escaping the mind through the mind. The mind is represented by the sword. We associate the sword with the Vishuddhi. Why is it associated with the sword? The sword is sharp. It can be dull, just like the mind. The sword comes to a point. When we're speaking logically, we are coming to a point. It cuts through the bullshit. It is something that can be honed and sharpened, but you can over-sharpen it. So that's what we're talking about now. We're talking about overstimulation of the mind so that you're sharpening the sword so much that it becomes dull. And it can be broken as well. It is a form of industry. It takes ingenuity, industry to develop this thing. So the sword is associated with the mind. And within Tantra, we associate the throat with the Vishuddhi, with the mind. It is the base of contemplation. So we have the Vishuddhi, the Ajna, and the Sahasrara, the base of contemplation. Now, how do you escape the mind using the mind? Let's look at the imagery of Shinamasta. So if you're listening to this live or if you're listening to the replay, bring up an image of Shinamasta, the Mahavidya Shinamasta. If you look at her iconography, what we have is this red-skinned 16-year-old yogini. She has cut off her own head with a sword. She's holding her head in one hand and the bloody sword in the other, and she's spraying blood, feeding the dakinis at her side. Okay, so that is the symbol of Shinamasta. This symbol represents many things. One of the things that it represents is how to use the mind to defeat the mind. So as I said, the sword is a symbol of the mind, and the mind begins at the throat and advances to the top of the head in Tantra. So Shinamasta cuts off her own head with her sword. Okay? What she is doing is she is using the intellect to defeat the intellect. And when she holds her head in her hand, this symbolizes her control over the mind. Okay? So the hands are one of the seats of willpower that we associate with the Anahata. She's bringing her heart into the forefront, her will into the control of her mind. If you begin to visualize your mind as a sword, as a weapon, you can start to see how it can be wielded with greater efficacy. It's difficult to visualize the functionality of the mind unless you have some physical thing that represents the mind. The mind exists in the contemplative space, so it is a metaphysical construct. And when we take the metaphysical into the physical form, this is part of Tantra. It's part of seeing things that have a spiritual nature or an intellectual nature within your physical environment. It is bringing the metaphysical into the immanent world. That's part of the nature worship aspect of Tantra. So, meditation on the sword is one of the ways that we can begin to use the mind to escape the mind. It's one of many different exercises, but it's one of my favorite exercises. So how does this work? For meditation upon the sword, you want some physical form of the mind. We use a blade. You can use a knife or you can use a full-size sword. Okay, you hold this physical object in your hands and you start to associate aspects of your mind with that physical object. So your mind becomes the sword, and your wielding of that sword gives you a way to reflect on the dangers of the mind. That sword can cut. Your mind can cut. Your mind can wound. You can do great harm to others through your words and your mind. You can defend yourself through your words and your mind. And if you pick up that sword and you begin to make the movements, swordsmanship, and link those movements to the activity that occurs within your mind, you can start to see in the physical world how you can better direct your mind to achieve your goals. So it's interesting that so many autistic people love to collect swords. It's probably some kind of primal instinct that is driving them to have a better grasp over their mind. They want to have access to some physical representation of their mind that they can manipulate and control. So this is a good thing. If you have access to a blade, I want you to do this meditation. This is good for anybody because it brings us into a deeper awareness of how we have wielded our mind in the past. I want you to hold the sword, look at the sword, and I want you to think about times in your life that you have utilized your mind, either against other people or against yourself. And I want you to see everything occurring in the form of swordsmanship. So let's say you cut someone down with a very attacking verbal expression. Okay? I want you to visualize yourself. I want you to hold that sword, and I want you to visualize yourself cutting down that person physically. What kind of physical harm would you do to them if your words were made manifest through the swinging of the sword? Okay? And swing the sword if you have to accentuate the meditative exercise. What you're doing is you're seeing the damage that you do to the subtle body represented in a physical expression. You can cut people, you can stab people, you can cut their arms off, you can cut their legs off. The legs represent the Muladhara, the foundation of a person. Have you cut off someone's legs with your mind? Have you cut off someone's willpower, their arms, with your mind? And then I want you to start thinking about how you have turned that sword against yourself. Have you destroyed your confidence by falling on your own sword, by cutting yourself? Have you destroyed your creativity? Have you cut yourself away from the spirit? Have you prevented yourself from being able to access greater supernatural or metaphysical experience because of the way that you wielded the sword against yourself? These are things that happen within us that we don't pay much attention to because it's all happening in subtle space. It's happening within a contemplative metaphysical space. But if we can bring that activity into the physical world to some degree, if we can assign it to a physical object, and we've all seen movies, or maybe we've seen, personal examples of people being cut by blades. Okay, so we can see that, and we can have a visceral, strong reaction to someone being cut by a blade, seeing the blood flow, because it's a gross expression, it's a vulgar expression, it's something that's right in front of us, it's easy to grasp and understand, and it hits us hard. For most people, that kind of raw physical expression will hit you harder than something that just exists in a contemplative space and has no physical form to it, has no contemplative form either. You can't even visualize it. But through this process, you can actually see this occurring. And it takes on more meaning. So, when you identify the way in which you can wield your mind, either against other people or against yourself, then you can start to see how there is a twin within you. There is an evil twin, all right? And I'm using that word facetiously because I don't believe in good and evil, but there is this twin that is preventing you from living the life that you want to live. And that twin is the culmination of all of the intellectual programming, the psychological terror that you have been exposed to throughout your life that prevents you from accessing other aspects of your consciousness. That programming has occurred as a result of the time that you spent in educational institutions, which are directed towards overstimulation of the mind. That programming is the result of interactions with family members who were also reared within that environment and now carry the damage from those institutions. That programming is the result of the media, political organizations, virtually every fucking thing that you come into contact with in modernity that is part of the superstructure of civilization will cause you some type of psychological damage and will program you to behave in accordance with the standards of productivity that keep that superstructure in operation. So, there are two forms of you. There's the form of you that right now is listening to this lecture and is thinking, God damn, I have got to free myself. I can't live like this anymore. I cannot be a slave to this mental matrix that keeps me from living the life that I want to live. That's one form of you. And the other form of you is Pavlov's dog. The other form of you is the mind slave that has been crafted by the conditions that you've been exposed to throughout your entire life. So what you've got to do is you've got to recognize that the form of your mind that is saying, I need to escape, I have to get out of this cage, that form of your mind is the aspect of your mind that is connected to your will. Okay? And the other aspect of your mind is the compulsive aspect of your mind that is a barrier to the expression of your will. So you have to develop clear division between these two things. One is the form that you wish to exist within. The other is the diseased aspect of your mind that prevents you from living with a healthy relationship to the intellect and other aspects of your body. So you have to wield that sword. You have to go to battle with yourself inside of your own mind. And you have to start to practice introspection in order to escape the introspective cycle. I know it sounds counterproductive, but for many people, it's the only way. Physical exercise won't be enough. Creative expression will not be enough. You have to recognize that your mind, certain aspects of your mind has become your enemy. But your mind is also your greatest ally. There is a split. You have to overcome the destructive elements of your mind with the healthy aspects of your mind. So essentially, there is this battle that's occurring now. You're fencing with yourself inside of your own head. And if you're going to succeed in escaping the confines of overthinking, overstimulation of the mind, you're going to have to go to war with the foundation of that overthinking, which, as I have demonstrated in this talk, is the prevailing age. Now, there are some individuals who are just born in a condition where they're going to be overthinkers regardless of social conditions, okay? And those individuals need to recognize that problem as well and deal with it through the mind, through meditative exercise. But for the rest of us, seeing the destructive potential of the mind within society and then reflecting on how that has been made manifest within the self, that is the effective path for freeing your mind. This is where psychology comes into play. So psychology is, when it's done in a manner that I consider to be most valuable for tantric practice, psychology is a form of yoga. It can be a form of yoga if it's integrated properly. And that yoga is directed towards understanding the mind and escaping its confines. So you need to study the mind in order to know your enemy and escape it. Remember, for most people, this is not my recommendation. I don't think the average person should be studying psychology. In fact, the study of psychology by the average person has led to a horrible pop psychology culture on the internet that has infected the personal lives of so many people. There's this cult of self-diagnosis now where people are falling into deeper and deeper mind pits. So for most people, no, you should not study psychology. But for those who have the intellectual aptitude for it and really can't escape the mind through physical activity, and by the way, don't get arrogant and think that, well, I'm an intellectual person, so physical exercise won't work for me. there is no inherent superiority of someone who operates from the physical body versus operating from the mind or any other position. So don't just shit on the idea of physical exercise as a way to escape the mind because you fancy yourself to be an intellectual, okay? I will tell you that I consider myself to be a pretty intellectual person, but physical exercise definitely works better for me for escaping the confines of my mind than diving deep into psychology. I find psychology to be fascinating, but the reason why I'm interested in it is because it helps me to teach other people, to guide other people, okay? It's helped me as well in certain aspects of the way that my mind operates, but when it gets right down to it, I get a lot more out of going for a run or doing some push-ups or boxing or something like that for my mental health than getting in and dissecting every little aspect of my mind. With that said, there are some people who need to go through that process of dissection in order to escape the mind. And so, study Freud, study the great psychologists, start to learn how the mind works. You don't have to accept their dogma. You don't have to accept Freudian dogma. You don't have to accept Jungian dogma. But you can begin to understand mental frameworks, and you can start to identify disease of the mind. And then once you've identified that disease of the mind, there are many different meditative exercises that you can apply in order to overcome the disease of the mind. I've talked about antarmona many times. It means inner silence, and it's a 6-part process that was taught by Satyananda in order to develop quiet in the mind. So it allows you to reduce the mental flow to the point where it's manageable. Okay, so that's just one exercise. I told you about the meditation on the sword. That's another one. There's also the interplay between the ajna and the vishuddhi, which is an important thing to consider. I call this the gallery. So the gallery is the psychological constructs that are developed within the mind that become narratives. They become narratives that operate usually in a subterranean manner, that become barriers to escaping over-intellectualization of things. So how do you sort through the gallery? Well, here's an example. You start to introspect on things in your life that are important to your identity or your daily activities. So if I'm working with a student, for example, I'll say to them, what is your opinion on hugs? What's your opinion on hugging? Okay? And so they'll give me an example of how they feel about hugging. All right? And then I'll ask them, okay, now, is this opinion that you have about hugging, is this something that empowers you or disempowers you? And they'll say, well, I have this anxiety about being hugged, so this is something that disallows me from having the kind of physical closeness with people that I want to have, so it's disempowering. Okay? And then I'll say to them, all right, well, we've identified this expression you have in relation to hugging, all right? It's a narrative that operates in your life. The narrative is that if you hug someone, it will be an unpleasant experience. So then you ask yourself, okay, since this is disempowering, can I replace this narrative? Can I replace this thought? Can I replace this image in my gallery with something better that empowers me? Is this practical for me to replace this? And usually the answer is yes, because typically what occurs is that there is some trauma in the life of that person that has led them to have this negative feeling towards something like a hug, and they have not assessed the foundation of that trauma. by assessing the foundation of that trauma, they're able to say, okay, well, whenever I was 4 years old, my cousin was picking on me and gave me a really big bear hug, and it scared me, and I thought that I was going to be injured. And after that, I started to be afraid of people hugging me, and it's just something that I never even thought about until now. Wow, I realized that this traumatic event that occurred all these years ago led to this belief that I don't enjoy hugs. Taking the time to assess that narrative, you realize you've had this unassessed condition within your life that has been a barrier to social interaction, which is in this instance something very simple that can be fixed. So you visualize this image of this moment in your life that deeply impacted you, this moment where you had this hug and it scared you, okay? Well, this is sitting in your gallery, all right? And if it is a painting in your gallery that displeases you, you're the owner of your gallery. You determine what paintings are in that gallery. If you have the power, if you have the ability to replace it with a different painting, then you should. One that brings you more pleasure, one that empowers you. There's no reason why you should keep it around, unless it is a source of power, unless you can reflect on that painting now and say, okay, well, that's silly. I realize that I'm not going to be injured by everybody that hugs me. I'm going to be okay. Someone can give me a hug. They're not going to pick me up and give me a bear hug. And if they do, I'll be okay. I'll tell them, no, don't do that. And I'm not going to allow this experience to scar me, to keep me from being able to embrace life. So yeah, you are the owner of your gallery, and you replace the image in that gallery with something that is empowering. Maybe I'll ask my student, I'll say, okay, can you imagine now a new way of perceiving life, a new condition for yourself that is empowering? They'll say, okay, very rarely will someone pick me up and put me in a horrific bear hug and scare the shit out of me. So from now on, when I get a hug, I'm going to assume that it's going to be a pleasurable experience. And they solidify that. Some of my students will actually draw the image down on a piece of paper so they have something to reflect on. It solidifies the experience of changing their mind in relation to a specific narrative, and now they're free. Now they're free to embrace this new, beautiful painting in the gallery of their mind. So, when you do this in relation to overstimulation of the mind, you can start to identify where that overstimulation came from. Like, for example, you might sit in reflection and you'll say, when I was in high school, I was picked on a lot. So instead of trying to make friends and socialize, I played video games. And I went into my own fantasy world. And I started to cope with my lack of positive social interaction with gaming, which is a condition that a lot of people face now. So, okay, how do you respond to that? Well, the assumption is that you will not have a good interaction with the external environment and socialization. So it is better to direct your time and energy towards introspecting in a fantasy world through video games or fantasy literature or something like that. Don't get me wrong, I love video games. I don't play them hardly, but I would like to. I mean, I have no problem with them, but I used to play them a lot when I was a kid. But I like video games a lot. I love video games, and I love fantasy literature. So I'm not shitting on video games and fantasy literature, but I'm saying that there's a condition where because of a lack of positive social interaction, there's an assumption that's made that the only time I'm going to get pleasure in life is when I'm playing my games or I'm reading my books. So I'm going to continue to do that because it's a waste of time to try to find that kind of pleasure outside of those frameworks. So you take that and you ask the person yet again, is this empowering to you? Is this image in your gallery something that should remain? Should you cultivate this idea? And for most people, the answer, at first they might say, yeah, they might be hesitant to change. But then when you're really honest and you say, okay, but your goal is to develop these positive social interactions and you're not happy, your mind is overstimulated, you have these anxieties, so you've fallen into sloth and you're not happy with your physical condition, with your emotional condition. So what should we do about this? Well, you have to change your assumption. You have to say, okay, there is a world where I can develop the ability to socialize, and the experiences that I had in high school are not going to be the experiences that I have for the rest of my adult life. I'm not confined to those people that I went to high school with. I can find new people to socialize with, and I can develop those skills. Even if it's hard at first, I have the ability to do that. I can do that. I can do that. I don't have to just rely on introspection as a place for comfort. Well, then you've replaced the image in your gallery and you stick with that. You affirm it. You say, okay, yes, this is my new belief. I'm going in with this completely. I believe that I can socialize. I don't have to retreat. I can fight for what I want. And I don't have to turn in on myself. When you start to affirm your ability to succeed and empower yourself through the development of these new narratives that assess trauma throughout your life, that is when you can begin to make change. And you're doing this through the mind. You're using the mind to defeat the mind. Okay? So, I've given just a few examples of ways in which you can escape overstimulation of the mind, overthinking. For most people, it is really just a matter of physical exercise. It's about embracing creative expression that can be an outlet, a funnel for the mind, for thoughts and ideas. And that's a bridge to openness for greater spiritual experience as well. When you apply the counterbalance of escaping your mind through creative expression and through the physical world, then you can start building a bridge to metaphysical, supernatural experience that the mind is very good at shutting out in its unrefined state. Sometimes in its refined state as well. Now, like I said, there are some people who need to escape the mind through the mind, and that's okay. If you're one of those people, then you can begin to apply some of the practices that I mentioned here, but there are many more practices. So begin to study psychology, begin to study Tantra, apply psychology in a tantric lens, apply it in a yogic lens, and when you can do that, you will have all of the tools necessary, you'll have the weapons necessary to go to war with that side of your mind that is preventing you from being the type of man or woman that you really want to be. All right, thank you all very much for attending. For my private instruction students, I will be logging on to the Discord for the question and answer session now. For those of you who are interested, you can find our back catalog of lectures. There's over 60 hours of lectures on our Patreon, Ride the Tiger Yoga's Patreon. That's patreon.com/Ride the Tiger Yoga. And many more materials you can access. A lot of those materials and lectures will deal with specific strategies that you can use to understand the mind and utilize yoga to escape the mind. So this is a good introduction to those principles of practice, but there's a lot more for you to explore and a lot of growth that can be achieved. Okay, thank you all very much. I will see you next week.